Thanks very much, Ambassador. I'll get right into it. We had lots of discussion yesterday about Operation Arctic Sentry, so the future of, I guess, NATO relations, at least in the Arctic, are currently being hammered out. But I want to ask you about EU-Canada relations as it relates to the Arctic. The first question is, you are the ambassador, the EU ambassador for the Arctic, and your economic bloc's Arctic policy identifies Canada as a key partner in the region. So concretely, what does Brussels want from Ottawa in the next 5 to 10 years as far as partnership?
Okay, so it's good first that you remind that I'm the EU and speaking for the EU, not for NATO. And I think there's been a lot of conversation about NATO. I don't know if it is, if the question should be asked as what we want from Canada, but more what we could do jointly. Something that is sometimes overlooked is that the EU is in the Arctic. The EU is an Arctic actor, an Arctic player. 3 of our member states are in the Arctic: Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, through the Kingdom of Denmark. We are a very important financial contributor to every policy in the Arctic, and our strength lies mostly in research. Anything related to research, Earth observation, but also regional development. So we are quite strong on that. Our legislation applies to a great part of the Arctic. You know, Brussels is a legislative power, sometimes very much questioned, but our legislation, whether it is environmental, about critical raw material, applies not only to the 3 Arctic states that I've mentioned, but also to Norway and Iceland, because Norway and Iceland are closely integrated into the EU market. We have special agreements. So we are very present. And now, I mean, we've always had links with privileged link with a country like Canada, which is a like-minded partner. We share a lot of values. And now that the Arctic is taking the forefront of every policy, it is time that we look at our friends again and look at how we could discuss what we can do jointly in the Arctic. And you name it, it's about critical raw material. A lot of things have been said here, but it's also about addressing what is the most overwhelming challenge in the Arctic, the most comprehensive, which is climate change. Something that is not very much mentioned over these days, but I think Ambassador Toots, the EU ambassador to Canada, said it yesterday. Under the geopolitical challenges and threat below, there is constantly this climate change threat. So here we can discuss with Canada. We share some challenges with Canada. I mean, I would compare the Canadian Arctic more to Greenland. So Greenland is not part of the EU. So let me go back a little bit. Greenland used to be part of the EU when Denmark joined the European Community at the time. And in 1985, Greenland decided to leave the European Community. So the EU today. And then we offered Greenland a different form of partnership. And we contribute a lot to the education system in Greenland. But what we have at heart is to maintain the prosperity for the people in the Arctic. And that is very important to Canada. And I think there is a lot of commonalities there, a lot of things that we can share and exchange experience. So these are all the issues we can discuss. And of course, we can discuss hybrid threat. The EU has an expertise in terms of hybrid threats. The EU has an expertise in foreign information and manipulation of foreign interference and manipulation of information. So all this we could discuss with Canada.
And if it weren't for a certain president to the south, we probably would be talking more about climate change. We are talking more about defense now because the ground has shifted. There's a tremendous overlap, of course, between the EU and NATO in terms of membership. So I think this is a relevant question. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, has repeatedly been talking over the last few months about seeing NATO take a greater role in protecting the Arctic, shifting some of its focus or devoting more of its focus to the north. And in fact, our former top soldier, General Wayne Eyre, said last week that he thinks there should be a sub-unified NATO command in Iqaluit. So I wanted to ask you about what the EU's perspective is on a greater role for NATO in the Arctic.
Well, yesterday we got the news that the Arctic Sentry was going to be launched, and I think it's a very important step. There was a Baltic Sentry, there was a Eastern Sentry, so this is a signal, and quite an important one. At the same time, it is obvious that the most immediate, the strongest threat remains on our eastern border, eastern as European, so this is Russia. And every day we read in the press about Kiev being bombarded by hundreds of drones. So this is where the immediate threat is. And this is very real for countries like Sweden, Finland. Finland shares a border with Russia of 1,300 kilometers. And this border is in the Kola Peninsula. Norway, which is our very closely associated partner, share a smaller border with Russia, land border on the Kola Peninsula, but a very long maritime border with Russia in the Barents Sea. And what is there in the Barents Sea? There is Russia's second fleet with nuclear weapons. So it is very real, very concrete, and very immediate. So there's no question in our way of shifting the attention. It's more about doing also something for the Arctic, and I think the Arctic Sentry is testimony to that.
Yeah, and that's still unfolding what exactly that means. But I did want to sort of bridge to a question about the fact that both Sweden and Finland have joined NATO. How does that affect the EU's, I guess, expectation for northern security and defense? You now have two of your EU members part of the NATO into a Western alliance that is far more active than it was 10 years ago. How does that change your perspective on security and defense in the Arctic?
Well, the first consequence is that it has changed the math for us. That means that 7 out of the 8 Arctic states are now members of NATO. It means that 23 out of 27 of our EU member states are part of NATO. So yes, it's a change of perspective. What it has changed is that the whole Scandinavian peninsula, this Scandinavian peninsula that sits right next to the Kola Peninsula, Murmansk in Russia, with the second fleet, is now NATO domain. We, EU, are not a military power. Let me be very clear. We will never send boots on the ground. We don't have subs. No, we're not into this business. But we can be a support through our industrial defense cooperation and supporting this industrial defense cooperation. For example, there's an instrument which is SAFE. SAFE is to foster joint procurement of armament with the support of the EU, and Canada is about to sign the SAFE agreement. Norway, Sweden, and Finland can benefit from that. What we can do also, something that is a lot talked about and that the EU facilitates, is those groupings of member states with some third countries to jointly work on dedicated projects in the military sphere. And one of the most popular of this PESCO project, it's called the PESCO project, is military mobility. And that is very concrete when you have one peninsula that becomes NATO, because before that, there was only Norway, which was a kind of the only one to be in charge of defending this peninsula. But Finland has always had its white troops on the border, of course. But now Norway becomes a transit country in the Scandinavian peninsula. And being a transit country requires a lot of work. How do you get all the material crossing all those borders, or the people? You may have rail tracks that are different from one country to the other. It is the case, actually. It's not something that I take out as a theoretical example. It is a very concrete fact when it comes to Finland. So here, the EU, with its legislative role, but also its financial role and its role of gathering member states and partner countries together to discuss, can be here and help. But I want to insist again, and I think Ambassador Toots made the point very clearly yesterday, security is not just military security. We talk about hybrid threats. Shall we speak about hybrid security, or rather comprehensive security? And here, this is where the EU can jump in as well.
What is the EU's interest in developing the North, extracting critical minerals, finding other sources of economic development there? I'm not really clear on.
It's called economic security. Now, you give me, an opportunity to expand on what security is about, and an important part of security is economic security. Right now, the EU, like many countries, is dependent on single countries for its critical raw materials. So we need to diversify. We cannot afford the vulnerability of relying on one single producer, from extraction, from the mine to, what was it called yesterday? From the mine to the magnet. I like very much this expression. We cannot afford that. So we have an interest in entering partnership with countries that share with us values and are reliable, or agree to go for sustainable extraction of critical raw material, there's not only critical ones, and that are reliable. And that's why we have signed partnership or memorandum of understanding on critical raw material with a number of countries, and Canada is one of them, and it is very important. And I think there will be soon a PDAC taking place here in Toronto in March to discuss this, and it is very important.
Prospectors and developers.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to first of all, I want to ask the audience if they have any questions. I know it's still early. Oh, that's great. We'll wait for the gentleman.
No. Yes? Wonderful. My name's Oliver Phelan. I'm from the British High Commission. I'm from the British High Commission. So we're slightly less involved in the EU these days. But I wanted to ask...
Never say never.
We're still in Europe, but not in the EU, I think is the official line. And obviously, the Arctic is another area where the UK is collaborating very closely with EU member states in the EU. But you mentioned that it's 3 member states are currently Arctic nations. So how do you balance the kind of requirements of all the member states, some which might not have too much of an interest in the Arctic, which might have other priorities? How do you balance that with still securing the outcomes for the Arctic that you want to see for the EU?
Now, someone said the Arctic is hot, and it was not only about the temperature, it was about how interesting, exciting everything related to the Arctic has become. So the UK has an Arctic strategy or policy. My country, I'm EU, but I also have a passport. My country, France, has an Arctic strategy. Germany has an Arctic strategy. Italy just released an Arctic strategy, so on and so forth. The Netherlands has an Arctic strategy. So you can see that it is spreading. There's always been a very strong interest in the Arctic, not only for Arctic states, but there's always been a scientific research interest for the Arctic. And clearly, the climate change happening in the Arctic will affect all of us, the consequence will go down. So everybody has an interest in the Arctic. That doesn't mean that the EU will not look at the Mediterranean or Africa, for that matter, or the Balkans, and of course, Eastern Europe with our very close neighbor, Russia. So all this has to be balanced out. But I mean, the EU is a big grouping and is the sum of the foreign policy of 27 member states. The EU needs to be interested in all these areas. And now there is clearly a very strong interest of all member states to look at the region. We can see, I mean, I give some examples. Senior Arctic official is one of those terms that exist in one of these titles that exist in relation to the Arctic Council. There are senior Arctic officials in China, in Japan, in the Republic of Korea, in India. Now the Emirates are very interested in everything related to the Arctic. So you see, it's spreading large.
I want to go back to the question of Greenland. Just because Mr. Trump has said he's rolled out military force, he still clearly wants to acquire it. And my question was about EU support for Greenland. How do you ensure that EU support for Greenland reinforces Greenlanders' self-determination rather than turning the island into a pawn in some kind of US-EU power struggle?
Okay. Well, first thing, come back a bit in the history. As I explained, Greenland was part of the European community, left it, and became what we call a novice territory for the EU, which means that it has, since 1985, it has a very privileged relationship with the EU, special fisheries agreement. I mean, 90% of Greenland export is fisheries, their output is fisheries. But since 1985, the EU has been consistently providing support to the education system of Greenland. 40% of the education budget of Greenland is financed by the EU, which means that the EU has been investing in the people of Greenland. That is our trademark, that is our DNA, and that's always been how we see relations with Greenland. Now, in the face of recent events, and also because the Greenlanders asked for it, we are adding another layer to our support to Greenland. And this layer is about supporting, becoming an incentive for investments into Greenland. And what Greenland, and this comes from the Greenlanders themselves, what they're interested in is to develop, expand the potential of this land into CRM extraction, energy, hydropower or green hydrogen, and the last one is digital connectivity. I mean, it's essential for such an isolated and remote island. And this is what we are doing. So we are speaking to the Greenlanders and to the Danes. Denmark is a member state, so we always speak to Denmark. We are speaking to the Greenlanders and asking them what they want. And whatever we will do, we will make sure it is for the benefit of the population.
Now, when it comes to economic development in the North, obviously European companies want to see more shipping, they want to see more mineral development. How do you reconcile that? You're going to have to be laying out, I assume you're going to play a role in regulating Arctic activity. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But how do you reconcile, your environmental standards with economic development in what's otherwise a pretty pristine environment? And will that be an inhibitor to growth?
No, I mean, this is the whole challenge, and it's never easy, whether it is a government or whether it is the European Union, to balance prosperity and sustainability. How do you manage to make the two go together, go hand in hand? And this is exactly what we are doing. We already legislating in the Arctic to remind that the north of Norway is north of Norway is Arctic, north of Finland is Arctic, north of Sweden is Arctic. So our legislation already applies, and we will look at CRM extraction so that it is sustainable. We have another principle, which is the free, prior, and informed consent of local population, including indigenous population. This is a deeply rooted principle of any policy of the EU when it comes to, in particular, to the Arctic regions. So we will look at that. Of course, we're looking at how shipping how to minimize carbon emission from shipping. That will be the next conversation, and it's a very hard one, fully aware of that.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience before I continue? Everyone looks like they're enjoying their coffee or their smartphones. So we'll go back to, I wanted to ask you about critical minerals. We have signed a critical minerals framework Canada has signed one with the EU. Do you see any scope for an Arctic-focused critical minerals framework? The circumstances are different, the environment's different. Is there any scope for a critical minerals framework between the EU and Canada that specifically focuses on the Arctic?
That's a good question, and I've asked myself this question. I've not gotten to the bottom of what we should do, whether there should be a kind of CRM alliance between countries in the Arctic. We have a CRM Memorandum of Understanding partnership also with Norway. So there is a huge amount of CRMs in the north of Sweden, in the north of Finland, and in the north of Norway, and there are several in Canada. We also have a CRM MOU with Greenland. So is there scope to look at how to go about CRM extraction and exploitation in the Arctic? Yes, it's a question that is worth being asked, but I don't have the answer now.
What is your prediction for the evolution of relations between the EU and Canada when it comes to the Arctic over the next 5 to 10 years? How do you see that relationship growing, and where will it grow, do you think?
I think, the fact that I came here, it's not a policy development, but that the EU ambassador for the Arctic comes to this conference, I think speaks to the importance we're giving to our relationship to Canada when it comes to the Arctic. So how much we will develop our relationship with Canada on the Arctic depends on Canada and depends on us. We are willing to speak more about the Arctic with Canada. There is so much that Canada can explain, teach us. Myself, in those 2 days, I've learned so much about how Canada looks at its Arctic. I've started to draw comparison with Greenland, a little less with the European Arctic, but there are similarities. And for example, we have a project in the EU, which is one of our most successful projects in the Arctic. It's a small one, I would say even cheap one, almost. It's called the Arctic Urban and Regional Cooperation, and we support municipalities in the Arctic across the whole Arctic except Russia. For example, Yellowknife, the mayor of Yellowknife, Ben, is part of this network that we support. We have the mayor of Nuuk in Greenland, the mayor of Tromsø in Norway, so on and so forth. Also Iceland and the Faroe Island is part of it. And basically, we're putting together all these mayors so that they discuss very practical issues like waste management, how to handle growing tourism in some parts of the Arctic, which has a huge impact on the environment and on the life of people who live there when the commodities are scarce, So this is one example where really the challenges of the Arctic have no borders. So it is important that we discuss together.
We just have a few minutes left, and there's a question that we didn't discuss before, but I wanted to ask you about. Many resource projects in the Arctic are short-lived. They last 20 to 30 years. There's not a lot of economic development prospects. How is tourism a solution to fostering economic development in the north, or is it too prohibitive? It costs $3,000 to get up to Arctic Bay from here. So I mean, do you see tourism as a way to foster economic development in the Arctic, or are there too many downsides to it in your mind?
There's a bit of both, of course. The thing is that tourism in the Arctic, whether you like it or not, it is happening. Yeah, Greenland. I mean, the tourism in Greenland is going up. Also, thanks to the opening of international airports, tourism in the north of Norway and Finland can be massive. Rovaniemi in Finland, which according to the Finns is the place of Santa Claus. Tromsø in Norway, I mean, charters of tourists go to these places, and it does have an impact on the landscape and on the life of people. And it is important that we discuss sustainable tourism. There's an issue that comes with tourism, and I've seen that for myself when I visited those places. It's the employment that comes with tourism. Yes, it develops employment, but something that I've seen is that it's very much short-term immigration of students in particular who come to work in all these areas. I mean, whether it's in the restaurant, in the bars, in the different shops, they come, but they don't stay. And that is an issue also that we need to address. An empty Arctic is not a safe Arctic, right? And we need to attract people and to retain them. And that is one of the important things we will look at. For that, we must make the place attractive enough. And one of our objective of our Arctic policy will be to work out how to make to build a social fabric around these Arctic municipalities. So there are social services, cultural services, so people come and stay. And in a way, that contributes to the security of the Arctic.
Well, Ambassador, thanks for spending the morning with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.